Foluso Phillips. It's 5 o'clock, and this is the time that we said we're going to get going on the EChapel COVID-19 Webinar, which is taking place on this May Day in the year of our Lord 2020. The theme of this webinar is about life livelihood. And obviously, as we go on, you would begin to see how things unfold. So we do thank you for joining us, and we can see that the numbers that are joining is moving up very, very rapidly. My name is Foluso Phillips, and I'm the chairman of Phillips Consulting, amongst other things. And I'd like to start by congratulating EChapel for putting together this third COVID-19 webinar. Obviously, it's the third in the series, and it's been going very well. And I really must commend the team that's been working, in the background, led by the chaplain himself, the Professor Reverend Koinsola Ajayi, SAN, and all the priests of EChapel, the church workers, and even a great and huge thank you to the EChapel congregation. All their well-wishers and friends, specifically for reaching out to those in need in this very, very trying period. EChapel has been very, very generous. They send out food packages for 5 days of 60,000 each day to Lagos, Ogun, and Ekiti states, which is very welcome. They've donated 6 ventilators to Lagos State. They've provided beds, gloves, and masks, and a whole range of the PPE equipments that are required for those that are in the front line that are dealing with this pandemic. So, like I said, we do congratulate EChapel for putting this together, and I think that we're all going to have an interesting session. As I start, and I'll keep on reminding you that we want this to be as interactive as possible, so we're going to welcome your questions, which you can post through the question and answer box right there for those of you that are coming in by Zoom, and in the comment section if you're using Facebook. So don't forget, you can get in touch with us by using those two facilities. As we sort of warm up, it's interesting to look at what's happened with COVID-19. Somebody commented that it actually brings out the worst in everything. From a physiological point of view, it actually goes for what we call pre-existing conditions of any person. But the pre-existing conditions that COVID tends to attack is not just in terms of the human body, but in terms of society itself and the economy and even political. It's almost like anything that is weak, it goes for it and it makes it worse. So you find that whilst people who are attacked by this virus suffer from their existing conditions are made worse, you find that society itself, where you have pre-existing conditions where things aren't working well, the COVID pandemic seems to play on those things as well. And that is why we have the poverty situation that we see is being worsened. The political tension is increasing. People are losing their jobs. The weakened economy itself is being pushed a bit further. And so clearly it is a multiple type of virus which does not attack the body, but seems to attack the whole society, and it really brings out the worst in us. Now, today's theme is about 2, maybe 3 things. The first one is about life itself, that is the ability of people to survive in terms of their health, to actually survive this pandemic and ride it through and find that you either escape it, or if you do come in contact with it, it is something that you can actually get through. And so the first is about life, and we would sort of talk about that and recognize that. The second is about livelihood. That is, in this current situation, how can we ensure that people's ability to survive by earning money, by earning a living, by being able to live life itself is supported. And we know that that itself is being seriously challenged. So whilst I'm healthy and therefore I also have the ability to earn, how can I exercise this by, improving my lifestyle, improving my quality of life? And so that's why I said it's about 2, maybe 3 things that we'll be hovering around, that we're saying is the ultimate delivery that we want to achieve in all the things that we're doing. And it is also about getting that basic thing, food security, food and help at the last mile. Because at the end of the day, I want a meal and I want somewhere to sleep and I know I want to feel safe. And the people have shown that they need help, especially because the system has stopped and the lockdown that we're experiencing has been extremely ruthless to many, and lives are finding that things are not ever going to be the same again, and people are really being shaken. And we also know, as a result of this, we're discovering very quickly that we are also very, very connected. And once there's a break in that link of connectivity, the whole system seems to come down, almost like a systemic impact. You talk about the value chain. Once something is not happening in a normal system, the system seems to crash. And that is what, again, we're seeing. Now, we know that we've been facing a lot of lockdowns in Lagos, Ogun, the Federal Capital Territory, and even some states where some state governors have decided to lock down the states. And next week, there is a plan to open up, or certainly not enforce legally, the Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory lockdown. And there's great trepidation amongst a lot of people about that, and a lot of debate is still going on whether this is the right way to go. But even then, many have said even the lockdown that we've sort of enforced over the last month or so, literally, has not really been one, because people have moved around and people haven't really observed this. And therefore, it's sort of made this conjecture that it is possible that, yeah, we can open up and nothing much will happen. But as people say, we seem to be guessing all the time. So we hope, as a result of this discussion today, to talk about the role of the corporate organizations, call it the elites of society, leading institutions, and even leaders in terms of the social and civic responsibility that they have in the reality of Nigeria today. And also, we want to, in the process, discuss the cost of this particular group of people and the cost of these organizations that we face from them distancing themselves from the politics and civic engagements, literally sort of not participating exactly as they should, and therefore, what price are we seeing ourselves paying as a result of that? And the third thing has to do with government itself, you know, either it's action or inaction of the political class and the public servants and the civil servants and those that run the machinery of government. And the whole question at the end of the day is, how can we get governments and the big corporates and individuals, how can we get them all to come together in sustaining life and living for the people of this country in the context of what we're saying? So that's really the kind of things that we want to achieve. And to make this possible, we've got a terrific panel of three very distinguished people who are going to be joining us or joined us. And we're going to be talking through, discussing, sharing views, their points of views, and see how we can hopefully come with achieving those things that I mentioned earlier on. The first member of the panel that I have great honor in introducing to you is Erelu Bisi. She's the First Lady of Ekiti State, and she's a feminist activist. She's a writer and a policy advocate, and a very prolific one at that. And in 2001, she co-founded the African Women's Development Fund, AWDF, which is the first Pan-African grant-making organization on the continent. Today, she serves as a United Nations Women Nigeria Senior Advisor, and she was appointed as a visiting Senior Research Fellow at King's College, University of London in 2017. In Ekiti State, where she is very, very lively, I tell you, she led the campaign to enact a gender-based violence prohibition law and an equal opportunities bill in 2013, and an HIV anti-stigma bill in 2014. And I won't be surprised if she embarks on an anti-stigma bill for COVID-19 as part of the work that she's doing. She continues to work on the implementation and sustainability of these initiatives as the First Lady of Ekiti State. She's currently the chair of the Gender-Based Violence Law Management Committee in Ekiti State, and she's also the chair of the Ekiti State AIDS Control Agency. So we do welcome Erelu Bisi, and we're looking forward to your contribution. We've all been talking a lot in the background before now, and I believe they're going to be pretty interesting as well. The second member of the panel, another wonderful lady.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. The second member of the panel is Zouera Youssoufou. Zouera is the Managing Director and Chief Executive of the Aliko Dangote Foundation, the largest private foundation in Africa. Zouera is responsible for the foundation's short, medium, and long-term strategies. She provides overall management oversight for the foundation and provides support on social investments to the corporate Dangote Group. She sits on several boards, including Private Sector Health Alliance of Nigeria, One Global Leadership Circle, the Center for Strategic Studies on Africa, and ABC Health. Now, as recently as March this year, a few weeks ago, literally, Zouera coordinates, or she's responsible for coordinating the Secretariat of COVID. Now, COVID is the acronym for the Nigerian Private Sector Coalition Against COVID-19. That's the group that you've been hearing and putting billions and billions of naira together. Now, but prior to that, Zouera had been in the ADF, and before then, she was the World Bank as the country manager for Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and Sao Tome and Principe. And prior to that, also, Zouera spent 6 years at the International Finance Corporation, where she led the Global Women in Business Program. And in that role, she was responsible for creating opportunities for women entrepreneurs in the developing world, specifically in access to finance. Zouera joined the World Bank Group in 2005 from Citigroup Smith's Banner unit in New York and Atlanta, where she covered emerging markets and 13 industry sectors as an equity research analyst. Her previous experiences include working with the European Union on private sector development issues and management consulting with Deloitte in Ghana. Zouera holds an MBA in finance from New York University Stern School of Business and a BBA in marketing from University of Massachusetts at Amherst Isenberg School of Business. Zouera speaks fluent English, fluent French, fluent Spanish, and very fluent Hausa as well. So Zouera, welcome aboard. Great to have you.
Thank you so much, Foluso.
Right, and last and not by no means the least, the man that is standing between the women is Mr. Tunji Lardner. Tunji holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Lagos, and he has served as an adjunct professor at the Columbia University School of Journalism. He has served as a research fellow also at Columbia University. He was a Reuters scholar with the Department of Communications at Stanford University. He's an inaugural Global TED Fellow at this TED Global Africa 2007, and sits on the advisory board of the TED Global Africa. Now, before his departure to the US, because he had been in the US for a while, Mr. Lardner was a well-respected and trusted journalist during the military era, writing at various times for the Punch newspaper, the Tribune newspaper, the Newswatch magazine, This Week magazine, and the Guardian newspaper. And, you know, those were tough times as well. Abroad, he has written for Newsweek magazine, Africa Report, West Africa magazine, the United Nations Journal, and contributes chapters in academic journals and books. And recently, he was appointed as Senior Communications Advisor to Nigeria's Executive Vice President, working on Nigeria's anti-corruption communication strategy. He was recently a Ford Foundation Anova Fellow, spending teaching and writing semester at an Indiana University, Purdue University in Indiana. Mr. Lardner is an internet savvy and globally recognized media and communications expert. He's a sought after public policy analyst with a deep and broad understanding of the uses and impact of new information technologies and communications in the process of good governance. And he sits on the board of many non-profits in Nigeria, in addition to being a mentor and cheerleader to an expanding group of young enterprising Nigerians. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the wonderful panel that I have with me today. And look forward to having a very, very interesting discussion and debate. So I didn't want us to get us going, but what I want to start off with is to ask each one of you, starting with Erelu and then Zouera and then Tunji, how do you feel right now? You know, how do you feel about what's going on today? I personally, I tell you, sometimes I feel nervous. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I panic about the health issues. I panic about the decisions that we're taking. I'm thinking myself, what's going to happen in the future? So I want to ask you, starting with Erelu, how do you feel right now with what's going on? And then Zouera, you follow, and then Tunji, you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Right now, I feel a number of things. I'll just name 3 of them. First, I feel saddened at all the death and the desperation and vulnerability all around us. It seems as if a lot of the things we have been able to invest in or pay adequate attention to have now caught up with us. And inadequate investments in healthcare systems, for example, in our education systems, and what's happening in the informal sector, where so many people are now staying at home with nothing to fall back on, since there's nothing for them to earn an income with on a daily basis. And also our failure to invest adequately in science and technology. So I'm really sad that we are faced with this situation whereby at the best of times we are struggling, and now every single system we have in place is being stressed. I'm also deeply concerned because it seems as if quite a number of people in the country, some leaders included, still don't fully understand what it is we are up against. And should the COVID-19 pandemic explode beyond management, we are going to have a serious crisis on our hands. And I don't need to belabor what it would mean if a country of up to 200 billion people should explode into a crisis. Having said that, I also feel hopeful, because this is an opportunity for some of us to sit back and think of how we can do better, how we can make better use of the resources and the platforms and the spaces that we have, and hopefully to be able to build a better society going forward, in spite of all the despair we see around us right now.
So I echo a lot of the feelings that Erelu expressed. I think what I'll add as my own is the hopefulness that we have to figure this out by ourselves. Like, there's no help coming from anywhere because obviously everybody is scrambling. So there's no magic bullet anywhere. There's no easy solution. There's no easy resolving of this. And this is going to take all of us in Nigeria, in Africa in general. We're going to have to figure out how to do what we need to do, make the investments that we need to make so that our health system, for instance, works. Right now, nobody can fly out anywhere to get any treatment, right? So no matter who you are, you're stuck with the system here. And I think it's never been as obvious to everybody that, oh, we need to really pay more attention to the healthcare sector in our country. I think we've been taking it in a very cavalier manner. Yes, we were supposed to spend 15% of our budget on health. We don't. We're probably at like 4%. But it's not even the spending that matters. It's the fact that a lot of people felt very comfortable that, you know what, if anything goes wrong, we can just, medevac ourselves out and just go somewhere. Well, now there's nowhere to go because everybody's freestyling a solution, right? America, we've never seen them look this disorganized, at least not in my adult lifehood. We've never imagined how, that Europe would be in the situation they're in now, how Asia, how our entire lives have been disrupted. So we in Africa have an opportunity to redefine for ourselves what we're going to do. Nobody can come and tell us what to do. We need to figure out what to do ourselves. And I think that is it's almost like a hopeful, on the other side of this pandemic, we should be better off health-wise, economy-wise. We will realize that we need to absolutely count on ourselves. And I think it will lead to investment decisions that we haven't been making before.
Thanks a lot. Tunji, how about you?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Hello, everybody listening and watching. Well, how do I feel? It's really, again, echoing the two ladies before me, the sense of sadness and, with a little bit of concern about what it is we are confronted with, because as we increasingly know that this is not just a public health issue. This is what one pandemic is, to be sure. But my own concern and worry, especially from Nigeria, is what about the other endemics that we are confronted with? Yes, we have a public health issue of global proportions, and it is global proportions. And we cannot underscore the importance of this. This is one of those moments in our lifetimes that we hope will never come again. But this is basically an inflection point in the course of human history. And to think of it as anything less than that would be extremely naive. This is the first time the entire world has been preoccupied with trying to solve a particular problem. Back to Nigeria, these are my concerns, and this is what more or less generates my fears, such as they are. Yes, we have the pandemic. What about the other endemics? We have what I might describe as a condemic. The economics of this country, the oil, the age of the carbon age is gone. Our entire oil sector, where it's responsible for 90% of our foreign exchange revenue, has totally collapsed. And it's not going to resuscitate itself in the incoming months, perhaps even years. So we're looking at a country that is hurtling down towards insolvency. What else? What are the other endemics? Well, there's the sociodemic, which is the mounting.
Have we lost Tunji for a while? Okay. It seems as if we've lost Tunji. He seems to have gone off the air, but I think we've caught the gist of what he was saying, talking about the fact that it's an inflection point and global problem, talking about even the local non-COVID related issues about revenue being gone and potential insolvency of the country. So I hope Tunji can join us very soon. And I want to sort of move on to what I like to call the starting point. And that starting point really has to do with the issue of the kind of, let me call it the kindness and sense of responsibility and sort of social contract that we seem to see around us from those who we call the leadership, the corporates, the institutions. And what they're doing now, some people say, well, shouldn't they have been doing this before? But the fact still remains that they're showing that they have the ability and the capability of being kind and being caring. And people have sort of quipped that as they care, they're showing, has it been because of the fear of retribution from the little things they see in the streets? Or is it more from guilt? Or is it from shame? Is it from shock or disbelief of what's going out there? Is it from the fact that they're realizing that life itself can be so fragile when you look at the number of people that are passing away each time? But the point is, it seems as if you're saying that, let me put in quotes, people do care. And we have to try and see how we can take advantage of that. So, my question to all three of you really, and I'll start with you, Zouera, is how do you think the society itself can engage with people? When I talk about society, I'm talking about the elites, the corporates, the great institutions that we have, the churches and so on. How can they engage with people beyond just sending gift packs and social welfare things that they're doing right now? That's the question I have for Zouera. But for you, Erelu, what I'd like to ask you is, even in that context, where do you think government can come in to meet society halfway, to meet these two groups of people, whereby there can be some kind of a handshake? How can that work? How can we make it happen? So we start with you, Zouera. What can we do beyond just these gift packs and welfare?
Okay, so I think it's reducing the impact of what people are doing to reduce it to gift packs and handouts. I think that's not fair. I think the reality is people do care. People have always cared, and people have always contributed and supported our needier brothers and sisters, right? So the idea that people are starting to care now just because they're worried about, you know, the less privileged taking over, I think is a unfair characterization, to be honest. I think we don't call African philanthropy philanthropy. We don't call it that because that's not how we even see it. We just see it as the ones who have are always helping the ones who are less privileged. So if we just look into our own individual lives, how many of our relatives do we support on a regular basis? How many people back in the village do we pay school fees for and medical fees for? And, you know, when they have issues, we give them money to start a business, etc. They have a charity, we support them. So I think it's not true that people don't care. People do care. I think that's the fact. We care and we do it all the time. It's not classified as philanthropy. It doesn't count as philanthropy. It's not structured as philanthropy, but we do it. Now, I think how people can get involved, the reality is there's a lot of things that people can do. And if I look around just, you know, looking at what my friends are doing on Instagram and on Facebook, everybody's setting up a food kitchen, distribution centers, trying to see how they can support the neediest ones, especially in view of the lockdown. I think the lockdown has made us, those of us who have jobs where we get a regular paycheck, recognize that, wow, a lot of people really live on a day-to-day basis. We know it, but I don't think we walk around carrying that in our heads all the time. We don't walk around carrying the weight of, you know, the person selling plantain chips during traffic. We don't think about them on a regular, we don't think about, well, where do they live and how much money do they need every day to make sure that they're fed, and what happens to them if we lock down, you know, their means of livelihood for a month. What are we supposed to do? So I think what we need to do is start thinking more generally about how we share resources just in general, right? So in my particular case, I happen to work for someone who has been doing philanthropy since before he was even this wealthy, because the idea of giving was just part of how he was raised. It's just part of life. You know that you're more privileged than other people, so you have to just give back to them. That was part of how his family is how he raised his kids, is how his mom raised him. And so I think we have a lot of this culturally, and it's not really a revelation. I think the moment when we realize that our paths and our fates are absolutely intertwined, and we need to care about what happens to the less privileged in society, is when moments like this happen. We're all stuck in the same country together. We're watching what happens. We're looking at the stress in the system, the stress level in the system, and also realize that the same health system that we don't necessarily patronize, this health system is all we have. And so if we don't start investing in it, then when we, God forbid, have a problem, what are we gonna do? Where would we go? We can't just buy a ventilator and put it in our house. First of all, nobody even knows how to use a ventilator. People have to be intubated, and you know, you need all kinds of special skills to do that. But the truth is, we need to just open our minds and our hearts to those less privileged. I'll give you a very simple example. When schools were closed and now children have to go to school online, what does that mean for the kids of the less privileged who don't have laptops at home, who don't have bandwidth at home? The school system in Nigeria doesn't support online learning. So it means that only the kids from the more privileged schools are able to continue their education in the exact moment where we need things to be even more even, so that everybody, when we come out of this, can have an opportunity to participate in the economy. I think it's time for us to start thinking more broadly about how do we create opportunities outside of, relying on oil. We need to invest in manufacturing. We need to invest in agriculture. We need to process what we eat. We need to rely less on imports. And sometimes I think the decision just has to be forced on us because, if we didn't have to, if we didn't now have this struggle of trying to figure out how to get foreign currency to import things, the necessity of developing our own economy and investing in ourselves wouldn't be as obvious as it is now. All countries, a lot of countries outside, and I'll stop in like a minute. A lot of countries, and we talk about all these Asian countries and how amazing they've been and their development trajectories. All they did was educate their people and invest in them and invest in themselves, and created companies, created opportunities, trained people, created capable elites and capable people who could deliver. And here we are today, we're talking about countries that were in the same development as most of us 60 years ago are way ahead of us. So I think this is just another wake-up moment. But what can we do? We can start with our own family, our own network, our own street, our own primary healthcare center. If everybody adopted a primary healthcare center and made sure it worked, we would solve it by ourselves.
Thank you very much. That's pretty comprehensive. You probably even touched a lot of things that I want to do later on. Tunji, you're back with us. Can you hear me, Tunji? Tunji? I don't know whether Tunji can hear me. Well, anyway, Erelu, I'll go over to you. Just in the same light, we're now saying, Zouera sort of described and she's, extended things a little bit more. And my question to you is, speaking for government, so to speak, how do you think government can meet people and have what I call this handshake, this cooperative behavior for the benefit of people along the lines of what we're discussing? Is Erelu with me? Yeah.
Okay, when we are faced with situations like this, we need to look at what we have in place and how we can make that work better for us going forward, or decide not to do business as usual. I spent many years in the British voluntary sector and understood the relationships between civic space, or what some people would refer to as civil society, or in the UK we used to refer to it as the social sector as well. I'm quite familiar with how the civic spaces like the UK, where certain structures and mechanisms and processes are put in place for the civic sector to function in a certain way and to complement the work of the government. I moved from the British voluntary sector into working for international philanthropy and development. And again, I saw the role that international organizations play vis-a-vis governments across Africa and the different challenges therein. And I've come to see, using Nigeria as an example, that it seems as if there's this perpetual dichotomy between the state and civil society. And then the businesses just try and work with whoever they can in between. I believe that there should be strong synergies between the state, the business sector, and the civic sector. And the civic sector actually comprises of all citizens, so we all have a space there. And so if you have a situation whereby the civic sector in Nigeria lacks the agency, lacks the capacity, lacks the strong institutions to be able to drive certain agendas, either to hold the government accountable or to complement the work of the government. When we are faced with situations like this, what is going to happen is we will find ourselves trying to play tennis with one hand tied behind our back. So I would like to see going forward, especially using this as using this opportunity to try and enlarge the space of civil society, to encourage all the different leaders and institutions and actors in all those spaces to step up as the leaders they are, and either work alongside government or hold government accountable while being prepared to be held accountable themselves. The government cannot take care of everything. There is no government in Nigeria that can fund every single issue that they need to address in their state. And there's no business, not even our beloved Dangote Foundation, that can feed every single Nigerian right now in this crisis that we have. But if we have the required synergies and partnerships across board, and our leaders in the political sector or public sector, the business sector and civic sector can come together, share ideas, agree core values, agree the best strategies forward for the people, and agree what is relevant to do right now and what needs to be left behind, I think we will be all the better for it. I agree with Zouera. We have always had a culture of giving in African communities. I think what we need to do more of is to be more deliberate about the role we expect people to play at whatever level, to be able to complement or supplement whatever the government is able to do. And of course, we also expect our government to be accountable. One of the reasons why people find it difficult to work with government is because they don't trust the government, or they don't trust political leaders or politicians. So it's up to our leaders to earn the trust of our people and to ensure that they are able to make good on all the promises and all the things that are supposed to be done, especially when we have times like this, where leadership is the be-all and end-all. We have countries around the world who I will not bother to name right now, who have totally unraveled before our very eyes because of the questionable leadership that they have. So I think that this moment brings up the kinds of leaders that we need, who can take this forward and make the required investments in all the places we've been lacking going forward.
Thank you very much. Tunji, you're back. Can you hear me, Tunji?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. We don't know what happened to you. But Tunji, I know you sort of caught, you might not have caught the question, but really what I was saying, and I do want your opinion on this, is how society can engage with people over and beyond giving gift packs, and Zouera dealt with that. And Erelu talked about how government can work with society. And now what we're saying, I'm asking you is, how do you think society should engage with politicians? Okay, in terms of how do we engage with politicians to take responsibility for what I call the social infrastructure, education, health, and things of that nature that Zouera talked about earlier on. So we have, what people can do on their own, what we can do with government, how we can influence politicians in dealing with this. And very quickly too.
Thank you. First, apologies for the disconnect. I think Erelu has put on a central point in the sense of what might be described as a social contract or lack thereof. There's no trust. Citizens do not trust their government and their leaders, and rightly so. This is years of experience. But the question now becomes, in this day and age of profound change, how can we reverse that? How can we begin? How can we begin kind of a new social contract for citizenship? Citizenship requires that as a citizen, you have rights, to be sure, but you also have responsibilities. What was the perfect storm of all the epidemics, right? Yes, right? To use a British colloquialism, faffing around, pretending to be a government, pretending to be a country, and we've left waste and left behind close to 100 million of our people.
Gosh, have we lost him again? It seems as if we've lost. Tunji, are you there? Have we lost you? Well, okay. Tunji, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. No,
yeah,
no,
okay.
I'm not on mute.
We lost you for a few seconds there.
Yes. Story of my life, you know. What can I tell you? So my own suggestion is, you know, we have to start thinking, especially leaders, and embedded in those leaders, the cater as a small band of the elite. Thinking about fashioning a new social contract in the broadest sense of the word that says, okay, we are your rulers, or better still, we are your leaders, and we have a social contract. What Erelu was also talking about was holding governments accountable. Citizens have lost the power and the will and the desire. There's a situation, psychological mindset called learned helplessness. We've been so battered that we do not think it's ever going to work, right? We have to rekindle hope amongst the citizenry. But in terms of trying to provide a concrete platform, I'm going to try and give the framing of what needs to be in alignment. And we can pick and choose, we can pick the 3 points I'm going to lay out here. For us to be able to move beyond this, we have to reform Nigeria, not reform in and that is almost going back to fundamentals. We have to go back to the basic design. To have the synergy of the wills. We have to have executive will, which is an executive, the leaders have to decide among themselves that they want to be able to do this. They want to be able to make Nigeria. And indeed, they have the resources, intellectual or otherwise, to do so. While they might not have the intellectual capital within government, there are lots of very smart, bright Nigerians who can be brought into this national effort at saving Nigeria. We have to have organizational will. Organizational will is reflected in the nature of government itself, the civil service, all the arms of government, the armed forces, all the structures that make up government and constitute how do we get those people aligned. Then the final will is the public will, the citizenry. How can we get them aligned with organizational will and executive will? The issue now becomes the quality of leadership itself. The truth about it is that we cannot continue to deceive ourselves. We've come to a crunch time, right? There has to be
Tunji, I want to suggest to you, if you could hear me, maybe you should just switch off your video and we just listen to your wonderful voice. I think that might help to relieve the pressure.
They are also part of this movement.
Tunji, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, if you switch off your video, I think it might help us to.
Okay, all right.
So you're wrapping up now, right?
Yes, I am wrapping up. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So maybe I'm having some bandwidth problems. Can you hear me now? Is it
clearer? We can hear you now. Okay. I just want to say that I'm going to be taking you up much later on some of the issues you're talking about right now. I just wanted us to touch on, and I meant politics in terms of politicians and the whole political process that we go through to eventually select our leaders and the engagement with people. But let me just move further down, still talking about this concept of caring, by saying that, okay, whilst Zouera mentioned it, it is the African in us that allows us to care naturally. And my point is, do we need to institutionalize this caring in such a way that we create new civic institutions beyond philanthropy? And as somebody said, the famous thing we say is that trying to not give people fish, but trying to teach them how to fish.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the way and manner in which we support the way in which we support, civil society supports society itself is not just limited to the traditional African way we do, but to see how we can capture that emotive commitment that we have into an institution. And I don't know what you all think about that, because I gave a quick example before, and I think Tunji, you also confirmed it, that when we look at, take in Southeast Nigeria, the Igbos, the whole concept of apprenticeship. You know, you serve your apprenticeship, you get your freedom, and you are sponsored by your mentor, and you go out and you do the same. And that replicates itself, and it's something that's very, very powerful. And you did mention that it's declared as the most powerful venture capital system that exists in the world today. And so the point, not to belabor the point is, can we institutionalize this so that we can capture, okay, this huge potential and this huge heart that Africans have, and make it more useful and more directed than the way we do it right now? What do you all think?
I think it's basic, and we should do it. Now the challenge will be, I think we have a fracture, right, between the public, the government. Everybody's talked about trust. If I tell you how many times I've heard, well, yes, so you know, the private sector has contributed all this money to COVID. How are you going to make sure that it doesn't get stolen? How are you going to make sure it doesn't get stolen? But the assumption is that it will get stolen, and so we need to put in place a mechanism to stop that from happening. But instead of thinking that way, or instead of doing it that way, why can't we imagine a society that takes care of our people? Like, why can't we have social nets and social protection programs? And why can't we have welfare programs for the needy? Or why can't we make sure that people who, you know, earn more, pay more in taxes? But all this requires trust between us and the government that's leading us, right? So right now at Foluso, if we were literally to set up an agency, let me say, that would be in charge of welfare, nobody would, I don't think a lot of people would contribute, because the concern would be like, well, who is in charge and what are they going to do with the money? And am I sure that my money is going to where I want it to be? So we need to institutionalize the things that we want to do. It has to be part of what is happening, that everybody agrees, and that our social contract as a country is about that. And that our leaders and our politicians that are elected on a basis of, you say this is what you're going to do, you do it, this is what we expect from you, you're accountable to us for those results, and if you don't do it, we will vote you out. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the society in which we live right now. But the aspiration should be to have a society like that where nobody falls through the cracks. There are very good examples around the globe of countries that are doing a really good job of taking care of the people who are needier, making sure that more people have more opportunity. There's no reason why we can't do that. There is no reason why we can't do it, but it requires a reshift and a rethink around how we build these institutions and how we bring trust back. I don't know what the magic bullet is to bring trust back between the people and government, but I know for sure that if there's no accountability to towards elected officials, then those wonderful ideas it'll be very difficult for them to come together. So it has to be something where, whether it's the, you know, public sector and the private sector coming together to come up with some kind of, you know, setup that would, you know, something for a rainy day for issues such as this one. I don't know, but it would have to definitely be it has to be a new way of thinking about our relationships between the government and the people. And I think if we can, you know, this is the conversation that I'm interested in having and hearing. How do we actually really do that? Because if we don't, it'll just be the same old, and that divide between the haves and the have-nots, the divide, the lack of trust between the governors and the governed, or the leaders and their people, that divide is what will prevent us from moving forward.
Yeah. And Erelu?
Okay, yes. Yeah. The way I see it is, we do not take the civic space seriously in Nigeria. It's a very broad space, admittedly, with so many actors, That's where we have the faith-based organizations, the trades associations, the alumni networks, the human rights networks, the women's rights organizations, those working on a whole range of rights issues, disability issues, and so on. But we do not see this space as something that can be harnessed by everyone for the common good. All that government seems to be interested in is how they can ensure that these networks are registered properly, and beyond that, they are not prepared to see how we can draw on the immense part of this network to strengthen a democratic system. There's a lot of tension, and we miss out on opportunities to have meaningful dialogue. I don't know how many people are aware, for example, that a network of civil society organizations in Nigeria have drawn up something of a roadmap for the Nigerian government to look into as a COVID-19 response. This memorandum has a lot of really interesting information in it that we could fault of so many very hardworking organizations in Nigeria being minimized and reduced to the barest minimum because they lack the capacity. And then all the voices we hear of are either those from political spaces or those from international organizations who come with the branding and the power and the resources of those networks from outside of the country. So what I'm advocating for is that we have a way of ensuring that civil society or the civic space in Nigeria, leaders in those networks are seen as partners in progress as opposed to being endless irritants and opposition. And then when it comes to the issue of political leadership, I believe, and now I'm speaking in my capacity as Bisi Fayemi, a citizen, I think our political leadership needs to do better.
Thank you.
What happened?
No, go on. We can hear
I
you.
believe our political leadership needs to do a lot better. We need to address the issue of trust. We need to address the issue of leadership as service. And we need to address what it means to be a leader for all times, not just in times of crisis, of the crisis that we have now. If you are not leading effectively during so-called peacetime, you cannot be an effective wartime leader. And I'm using leadership in its broadest sense, not just of the political leadership. All leaders who are emerging in our different spaces, all of us have a role to play in this. Let me take the faith-based institutions as an example. We have been convened by Emmanuel Chapel. They have done amazing work sending out food, for example, to different parts of the Federation, convening conversations such as this. And we also had some religious leaders from the civic space who are spending all their time and energy insisting that people need to come back to church because they have to pay tithes. How does that help us in the middle of a pandemic? So I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for us to engage in conversations that can help us unlock all those barriers that we know have been there and we need to now start paying attention to for a post-COVID world, if there will ever be a post-COVID world.
Thank you very much, Erelu. And we switched your video off because the minute we did that, we could hear you perfectly. So I think maybe we can switch on when you're not speaking and switch it off when you are, so that at least we can still see you. Well, thanks for that contribution. Now, I don't know if Tunji is still there.
He's here.
Yeah, Tunji. Okay, so Tunji, I don't know. Did you pass any comment on this issue about building institutions to capture the civic and commitment that that Nigerians and Africans make available?
Yes, I did. I mean, a lot of it is familiar turf in terms of the challenges we face in nationhood and building sustainable institutions. And I take Erelu's point about civic engagement and the fact that the civil society, the third sector, whichever way so defined, has to be an integral part of it. And that's where mostly everybody is a member of the civil society by extension. But the challenge is not so much the technical aspects. Yes, we might have technical documentation, technical proposals as to what and how to do solve Nigeria's problems. Nigeria's problems are not only technical, they're also largely adaptive. And by adaptive, that is softer, rounder edged, difficult to pin down, but vital towards the advancement of this country. What do I mean by adaptive issues? The adaptive issues are basically mindset issues. How do I change the mindset of the citizen to feel included, to feel that I have a stake in this polity called Nigeria? How do I change the mindset of my leader to make him feel responsible and accountable towards us? And that's what you were alluding to when you were thinking in terms of caring and compassionate leadership, right? It means that whoever bubbles to the top under the present circumstance and the way the means of ascent is designed can only be of a particular stripe. And those are things we're looking at. Those are adaptive challenges. Those are not technical challenges. We have all the technical experts in the world. I mean, so the brightest people in the world are literally Nigerians. So there's no shortage of bright Nigerians and bright ideas. What there's a shortage of is empathic, enlightened leadership, engaged and determined followership. But we build these institutions, or lack thereof. I mean, look at it this way. The present administration over the last couple of years have spent more in supporting the subsidy than on health and education. About 10 years ago, there was an Abuja declaration that the governments would all spend 15% of their budgets on health. It never happened. And citizens have never pushed that hard up until now. So the thing is, instead of looking at the chaos that is unleashed, is perhaps a wonderful problems through the lenses of what are the technical challenges to be sorted out. The technical challenges are, in my estimation, nature of the polity of the Nigerian state. We have to go back to the basics in the fundamental redesign of the state. As it is now, as it's operated and it's constituted, it does not serve the interest of most Nigerians. The second part is the adaptive part, is that how do we change the mindset of Nigerians? How do we speculate around the word of trust that Zouera talked about and Erelu highlighted? These are really ways to independent. How Nigeria? That is where we are, and so I think I'm informed by this and looking for great framing of the solutions too.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Tunji, for that contribution. We kept losing you again there. But I've got messages saying that I need to open this up. But before I do that, there are two more things I want to really, two questions I really want to get cleared out. And the first one is to Zouera, and because, and I call it the challenge of philanthropy. It's not easy to give away money. And like I said, you and I, we've discussed about this. And even though there have been many initiatives, but the ability to deliver to the last mile and beyond. I want Zouera to share with us your learnings and your experience that you have with Dangote, with the Dangote Foundation. I know that probably the largest funded on the continent. And I'm saying that, what are the things you've learned? How are you dealing with this practical challenge of not even just the COVID situation rather, but even in terms of philanthropy on the continent, in Nigeria, the different regions? How easy has it been, or how difficult has it been? Because I know it's just not about throwing money at things. Yeah. Can you switch Zouera on, please? Yep.
Okay, so it's not easy. giving out money in an impactful way. The impact, making an impact is what's difficult. So just throwing money away at a problem doesn't solve it. So for instance, now, if you just think about the COVID issue that we're dealing with now, it's not a money issue, it's a structure issue. Like, okay, we don't have enough testing capacity, so we can't just buy it. Like, we can't overnight just buy labs and all of a sudden we have enough testing capacity. We have to have a structure within which the labs are working, the reagents are coming, the global supply chain, we're a global player in it, we know how to get the stuff. Getting things to needy people down to the ward level has been challenging in a way that I never expected, because the theory was that if we're giving, I'll give you the example of this micro grant program that we do across the country, and we ask every state to identify for us the 1,000 neediest women in all of their LGAs. And obviously we need the state to help us do that, because we don't live there, so we don't know who the people are. But you know how in a community, everybody knows who the needy are. But it's always a challenge to make sure that we don't end up with, the wives of leaders and traditional rulers either extorting the women that we're trying to give money to, or coming after we've done a good job of really being there at the last mile, physically being there, handing over the money or the supplies or whatever to these women, make sure that they're secure after that. Because we've had a couple of examples in states I will not name, where after we left, the traditional rulers sent people to extort money from those women. So just imagine that. Like, it still hurts my heart, because I'm just thinking, we gave these women 10,000 naira, which is a lot and not a lot of money, depending on how you're looking at it and what the circumstances of their lives are. But they can get an expansion of their business. They can expand their business, whether it's frying akara, or we're talking about small capacity income generating activities, not businesses. I'm talking about the neediest women, widows, people with physical disabilities, and that have challenging lives in rural Nigeria. And some of these people, with that 10,000 naira, someone will go and take it. So how do we even deal with that? So in the last example, of course, when somebody called us, we rushed over there, we called the governor, there's this big inquiry. It turns out that it was 3 traditional leaders who had said, these 3 women, we're the ones who put you on the list, so where's our cut? So there's something deep that we need to really face, I think, as a country, to just understand that our values have changed. I'm 52 years old, and I remember being in 6th grade and cheating. So when I was 10 years old, cheating on an exam was like a disgrace. It was people would rather get a 0 and fail rather than cheat. And today, parents are the ones who are, bribing teachers to have their kids pass. So what happened to us? I think that whole going back to basics, talking about love of country, honesty, integrity, everything that we're doing, how we are as a people, I think we need to really just come back to that. We cannot keep talking about how good it was back in the day. That's depressing. For everybody to say, oh, back in the day when we were at Queen's College or King's College, everything was wonderful, 3 beautiful meals a day. All the people who graduated back in the day from King's and Queen's College are the leaders of Nigeria today. But what's happening now? Now, a couple of years ago, don't we have like some horrible story about kids getting food poisoning? The infrastructure has fallen apart. Why is it that before it was so much better than now? I'm thinking the future should be more hopeful than the past. We need to be doing better as we go, rather than remembering the glory days of how it used to be 30, 40 years ago. So I think it's this coming back to the basics, coming back to values, finding corruption unacceptable. Why is it okay for us? We bribe people throughout the day. The policeman stops you, says you can't go, you give him a bill and you go through. Something happens on the road, an accident, you bribe somebody, it goes. So if we've internalized it to the point where it doesn't even shock anybody's value system, then how do we not think it's going to be worse as we get higher and higher on the, let me call it, value chain? So we need to get back to the values. And I think this is where civil society, whose job I've always understood to be this counterpower to government, this forcing accountability into the system, also have a role to play. But their role has to also not be misconstrued or changed, and there's just a lot of things that we need to change. But we're nobody's victim. This is us. We're the same people in Nigeria, the same stories about the same you guys, Foluso, who went to these amazing schools back in the day and who are doing what you are doing today. What is happening to those schools now? Why don't we think that every school in Nigeria today should be like those schools back in the day that were culturally mixed, kids from all over the country, excellent quality, excellent outcome, excellent education? That's the basis of development. That's the basis of life. If we don't do that, we're never going to get to where we need to be.
I'm very linked to that as well. I actually want to pass this on to Erelu. Because somebody said, look, you must make sure you mention this, Foluso. And I'm calling it making COVID-19 even tougher than it should be. And I'm putting government behind that, in the sense that whilst people are trying to cope with the lockdown, trying to cope with the loss of income and the fear they have about their health challenges, government seems to be in the way. And I know, and this is a fact, I'm sorry to say, or maybe not sorry to say, that, civil servants, today see this as a great opportunity to cash in. Whilst health workers, the doctors, and everybody else, they're trying their very best to try and salvage what we know is going to be a major, major challenge to us. You're having people that are in the process extorting money, like you said, inflating contracts, at the risk of people's health, and even issues about logistics management for food distribution and so on, which logistics companies are better at it. The servant said, no, we're going to do this ourselves, we're going to do it ourselves. And it never really gets done the way it should be. The police, they've stepped up their toes along the way. I know of somebody that was coming with food stuff, and because he refused to sort of, pay some money, the truck was left there overnight and everything got spoiled overnight and was totally useless. And in this day and age where we're all worried about food stuff and worried about food security, and local governments and the palliatives are becoming political. If you're not a member of this party, you can't get this. These are things that are actually going on. So the point is, we're saying, and Erelu, I want you to, again, from the civil society point of view, I don't want to put you on the spot to say, okay, yes, you're married to a governor. The fact still remains that I know your stand. And the point is, how do we deal with making sure that specifically, not even talking about the future, we're talking about right now facing this COVID situation, how can we get government to align and make life a lot easier for all of us? Erelu, any points, any ideas on this?
As far as this conversation goes, there are no, let me stop my video. As far as this conversation goes, there are no saints here, and we are all sinners. It's very difficult for us to talk about one sector being responsible for dysfunction without putting everything in its broader context. To pick up from something I said earlier, which Zouera re-echoed, we've had a breakdown in values at almost every point, starting from the family, the schools, and different workplaces, whether you're talking about the civil service, the corporate sector, the informal sector, or so on. Everybody wants to compromise the system in one way or the other. So the way I'll approach this is flagging a couple of things. First of all, the question of leadership. Fish usually starts rotting from the head. I tell people around me about a time when, as one of the things we were doing at the African Women's Development Fund, was raising a lot of money for HIV/AIDS and then supporting African women's groups across the continent on the work they were doing in HIV/AIDS in their different communities. And that was the time when a lot of donors were pouring millions and millions of dollars into the continent. And they kept saying, we find it difficult to identify the right kinds of partners to work with because there's always some story that happens with the money. And so I would tell people around me, including our grantee partners, that look, I have this very simple belief. If you raise resources in the name of something or a particular group of people, and you misuse those resources, there is a natural law of karma that will catch up with you. So if you are giving money to work on HIV/AIDS and you misappropriate the funding or do something else with it, one day, don't be surprised if you or someone close to you becomes susceptible to the disease, and then where will you be? And that is the principle I continue to live by and continue to share with everyone around me. Now back to the issue of how this fits into our present situation. We should remember that there are many leaders who want to do the right thing, but they always have all these obstacles in their way thrown up by society at large. And this is where we all need to pay close attention to. Zouera spoke about how at community level there's this conspiracy to ensure that resources don't get into the hands of those where they need to get to. Well, the thing is, we know how to get resources into the hands of people who need them. But we first of all need to look into how we support the right kind of leadership in those communities to ensure that people don't get shortchanged. Following on from the issue of leadership is to do with the issue of our infrastructure. By accident or by design, we have not made the required investments in things that would have made people's lives easier. Our roads are terrible. We have serious problems with power. In Ekiti State, for example, we have been waiting for almost 1 week now for some trucks that are supposed to come from a part of Nigeria, bringing food supplies to the state. And it's been a combination of not being able to travel on the roads, being stopped by security officers who are harassing them, and so on. So we need to pay attention to those things as well. And then there's a very serious problem around communication. We live in a society where a vast number of our citizens do not have access to the information that they need. They live in remote areas and vital information does not get to them on time. And sometimes, again, their leaders don't believe it's worth their while to ensure that information needs to get to them in certain ways. These are structural issues, these are attitudinal issues, and these are issues that we need to address in the context of how we move forward. I think that as we look at how vulnerable people are right now, and how these deform what's in people if we are not careful, now is the time for us to keep passing the message around, for us to be kinder, for us to be more disciplined, for us to show integrity, for us to try as much as possible to be our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. And these values we are talking about, we lament them, but at the same time, we still have some people who are still willing to do the right thing. And I think that gives us an indication that not all hope is lost. Many of you would have seen what happened the other day with Mr. Femi Adeoye from Ekiti State here, who refused to allow his son to go home with him, telling his son that he entered this, he basically sneaked into the state after where he has been told, traveled all the way from Ogun State to Ekiti State, and you want to come to my house without going to quarantine as laid down by the government. This man refused to take his own son home. And now, in recognition of this man's efforts and sacrifice, basically thrown his own son under the bus just to prove a point, which shows that we do have people with integrity left amongst us. He's now a COVID ambassador for us in Ekiti State. So I'd like to think that we have many more of him who we can seek out and invest in to work with government and civil societies at different levels to ensure that not all hope is lost. But there are strategies we need to think about as we have this conversation that is suitable for somewhere along the line, and strategies we need to think of that we need to put in place now, because this is wartime as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, thank you. And I know these strategies are things that we're all looking forward to. I'm under a lot of pressure from the back office, so to speak, because we've got loads of questions that are coming through. Some of them in sifting through, I see that they've been answered in one way or another. But here's a question to the panel. This is from Dolu or Solu. What would possibly happen to Nigeria, Nigeria's economy, its livelihood, etc., if the lockdown lasts for a year and over? I believe your answers to the question might help some of us to be more open and prepared for the unexpected circumstances or opportunities surrounding this pandemic, or both. And basically what this person is asking is that, look, if this lockdown just goes on more and more, and the lockdown can either be official or just the reality that people are just staying at home and business is not taking off. If it lasts for, say, to the end of the year and beyond, what do you think, what is the probability and what do you think would happen? I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but a quick response from somebody. Who's going to volunteer that?
Well, I'll volunteer.
Make it quick.
Foluso, I don't think we could stand to do this for another month. I think there are arguments on both sides of the, aisle, lockdown or not like lockdown. But like I said in the beginning, nobody knows what the answer is. So the world is freestyling the answer. So it's not like there's a specific roadmap to success, right? We look at what's going on in the US, we can see that, some states are opening, some states are not reopening. Do they have enough testing? They're not sure. Is the disease going to come back? We don't know. We look at Sweden. Sweden said no lockdown. The cases are still there. Their strategy is like, look, everybody's going to get it anyway, so why should we destroy our economy while trying to ineffectively try to keep people in? So I think we can see both sides where, you know what, let's try to not propagate this virus, but let's not destroy our economy either, because then fine, we would have survived COVID, but then there's no economy left to survive into. And I think this is the scariest part for me, is what happens after this. When we know that most people are just gonna have a mild case of the disease anyway, it's only about, 15% that are gonna be ill, 5% approximately who will be severely ill. That means that most people will be fine having it. And just so we know, basic statistics, malaria kills 300,000 people in Nigeria every year. And this is even as population has gone up, that number has kind of stayed steady at 300,000 people a year. So far, globally, we have 200 and something thousand people dead. In Nigeria, we officially have less than 50 people who have died. So in terms of what's really killing us, I don't know I'm not trying to minimize COVID-19. COVID-19 is not good, but I'm just saying in terms of the things that are killing us, malaria, Lassa fever, diarrheal issues, women dying in childbirth, these are the problems that we have. So COVID-19 has been killing people in Italy and in Spain and in the China and in the US and, becoming this gigantic tragedy. But we have been dealing with way worse before. So what we need to be thinking about from my perspective is, how do we survive? How do we survive the economic shutdown? How do we survive the fact that the world has slowed down, oil prices are gone, we cannot count on that coming back anytime soon. So what do? How do we get our economy going? How do we get people back to work? How do we get people, kids back in school? how do we rebuild our, and I'm saying rebuild or build out our health infrastructure? That's what we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you. And what I want to go on to, I don't know whether Tunji is still with us. Again, another question from Sheikh Madeniji. Do the panelists see a need for a public-private sector data gathering, data analytics project across Nigeria's 774 local government areas that provide real-time data sets that can be used for predicting the outbreak of diseases, epidemics, so that going forward, the authorities always remain ahead of the curve and allocating resources for public health, etc. I think basically what this question is asking, that can we possibly have a situation where we are a bit more analytical, a bit more granular, to the extent that we've got data on all our local governments and things of that nature. So
that would be
Can I chip in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Tunji, go on.
Yeah, yes. Of course we can. The challenge is not so much the availability of people to get the data. The question is how do you make sense of the data? And I think also that we have to be very, very careful that in the rush to normalcy, that the expectation that everything will be normal is false. This is a whole new reality. And we have to think about it in such extreme terms. A lot of things are possible, to be sure, but I just believe that there's a demarcation before COVID and there is after COVID.
Are you done? Zouera, were you going to say something? Because I seem to have lost Tunji again. Zouera, you're done? Were you going to say something? Zouera, you just agreed? Yeah?
Yeah, I completely agree. Of course, we need data, and if we can have granular data down to the ward level, down to every person, we knew where everybody was and what was going on with them, then yes, we could definitely use that.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm sure Erelu, this is the kind of thing that even civic society would need in order for it to be able to support government on the side. Let me move on to another question that actually the first question that came up, and this will, well, whoever wants to take it up, is from Archbishop Olawuyi. And he said, about the philanthropists, how honest are they about what they do? In whose interest? Is it to really assist the vulnerable or to play good before the government in order to be relevant or gain favor? Because I know that, in recent times, there's been a lot of front page, let me unfairly, and I say this carefully, a lot of front page show about who is donating what, and I think what the bishop is really saying is that, look, is this through philanthropy or is this part of one's very complex, sophisticated marketing process? This is to anybody on the platform.
I think that's a fair question. I really do. I think what people need to do is understand what is being done. Like, what are people doing? People, are screaming that they're giving out, billions, and that they've set up foundations and they're giving, this billion here, that billion there. I think that the key is for people to go and challenge those numbers. Show us what you did with the money. Show us where the investment was. Show us what you did. I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying I know what we do, and I also know that the Dangote Foundation was incorporated in 1993. So Aliko started doing this when he was 36 years old. It wasn't a fad at the time. Nobody even knew what how to register a charity. Young people weren't doing this. This was like a older person's game, if you will. So the fact that, he's been doing this, the money is traceable, our investments are visible. And I think that's the whole thing about accountability. Someone says, oh, I gave X number of billions. Okay, well, show us what you did with it. Let's see. What's the impact of that money? Did you really spend it, or did you just say you did? And I think if we held people's claims of contribution to the same standards as we, checked other things, then we would be surprised to see how many people are claiming to be philanthropists and are not doing it. But it's really not difficult to find out where money's been spent. It really is not.
Yeah, thank you. And I want this question is to Erelu. Two questions really. One is from one of our listeners, and the other is one that I have. And it talks about the civic space is doing so much, and that is why we have not had a total revolt yet. How much has the government done in partnering and strengthening lives? Well, I know we've touched a bit on this, but I don't know whether you want to pass any comment on that. That yes, in fact, the reason why we have our put in quotes peace and stability, thank God, is that the civic society is doing so much to complement government. And the question is, how much is the government itself doing? And Erelu, whilst you answer that, I also want to add to this. You do a lot with women, and we've touched on that. But more interestingly, what's happening about the schools? Schooling at home, people that have no internet access. The feeding program is gone for those who actually eat, because I know that going to school, the lunch is an important part of the health program for children. So how are we going to deal with that, where one is not, it's not a case of having internet access and going to school online? How about the rest of the country? And also for our women, what are we doing with our women at this particular point in time? We know there's life after COVID, but for now, Erelu, any comments? Is Erelu still with us? Or is it just Zouera and others left?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Did you hear me?
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, first of all, I've spoken at length about government and civil society or civic space. What I'd just like to add to that is, in other parts of the world, say the UK, for example, we have the Charities Commission that is responsible for oversight of all voluntary organizations in the UK. And every organization that has an income beyond a certain level has to submit a report through its management committee or executive board to the charity commissioners every year, as well as audited accounts. Here in Nigeria, we have the Corporate Affairs Commission, which is supposed to be playing the same role. But sadly, it does not seem as if it is up to the task of providing a safe and knowledgeable space for the regulation and the engagement with civil society. As a result, we have thousands and thousands of organizations mushrooming all over the place, doing their own thing with very little accountability, with no sense of how they're raising their money or what they're spending their money on. If we can have a process of regulation that is not the same thing as hounding and policing and mounting surveillance to silence civil society organizations, then we'll be able to get the best of both worlds. The government will have reliable partners. We'll be able to see those civil society organizations who are capable of delivering certain services that the government is not capable of doing, and who can be scaled up through grants or contracting or partnerships to ensure that this happens for the common good. So that is one area I would like to see going forward, to have a civil society space in Nigeria that is regulated by civil society actors in partnership with the government. There have been attempts at certain legislations which have actually not been in the best interest of the social laws, civic sector in the country.
Okay, it seems like we've lost Erelu as well for now. Yeah. Tunji, are you there? Is Tunji there?
I can hear you.
Okay, Tunji, you can hear me. I just want to ask one question. I hope that you can make it short, because you've talked a bit about a new mindset, and my question really revolves around that. Is that
hello? You can.
We sort of we lost you, so we I've moved on to Tunji now. Have I got Tunji with me now? Zouera, I know you're still on the line. Tunji and Erelu, are you both still on the line? Gosh, I seem to have lost both of them. So Zouera, it's just you and I was just trying to throw in what I regard as my last question, and I think we really need to, because I think the system is beginning to really play up. Erelu, are you back on the line with us? Well, okay. The last question I have was really for everybody, and it's one that everybody's talking about, and it's really, do we lock down or do we not lock down? Okay, and there's been a great debate. There was a recent webinar on Africa.com just earlier on this week, where an expert from Yale. Okay, are you back on?
I'm back now.
Okay, I just want to wrap up. I want to wrap up with one final question, because I think we spent about an hour and a half, and the technology is really not on our side anymore. And it's about whether we lock down or not. And I was just saying that on a recent webinar by Africa.com earlier on this week, an expert from Yale said that lockdown is of no effect in a low-income country where there's a bad healthcare system like ours, because other health issues will not be dealt with. And people, because of this, they won't be able to eat, and there'll be insecurity, and all those things that we've mentioned. While on the other hand, we have the likes of Governor Nasser El-Rufai, who says in Kaduna that he's going to lock down no matter what. And he says locking down is the way to go. I know this is a very, very sensitive, contentious issue, but from your own perspective of these choices, what would you recommend? I want to start with Erelu.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Did you hear my question?
Yes, I heard the question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm still going to get in my bit about women.
Okay.
Okay, what I would like to see happen now is a very cautious relaxation of the lockdown. We can't afford to continue locking down our states, particularly as we see the effect on so many people. So, but I would like to advocate for a very cautious approach to it. Earlier on, Zouera spoke about other illnesses in Nigeria that we should be more afraid of, and that can account for more of the body count. While I agree, I'm also very scared of COVID-19, because I know that in the US, for example, I went to the US on March 7th. And when I arrived in the US at the time, the number of people who had died of COVID-19 in the US were still in the single digits. They were not up to 10. And now this is the 1st of May, there are well over 60,000 deaths. So I think we need to be very cautious. We need to continue the sensitization and advocacy in our communities. We need to continue to appeal to leaders at all levels to help and support in the sensitization and awareness, and support for people who are not able to leave home. Because I'd also like to advocate that the elderly or those who have underlying illnesses, which might make it extremely dangerous for them to contract COVID, to continue to stay at home or work from home. So we need to be able to pay more attention to that. When we have any kind of crisis, women and children suffer in so many ways. We've experienced the rise of violence against women during these lockdown periods, for example. We've seen a lot of women, men too, but mostly women, being brutalized by security services who want to enforce the lockdowns. And we've also seen a lot of women being denied access to certain services, such as antenatal and other kinds of reproductive health services that will need to during this time. Not to mention the fact that women constitute at least 50 to 60% of those in the formal sector, and they're the ones who bear the burden of care in the family. So we need to pay attention to the impact of these issues on women and ensure that women are actively involved in decision making and implementation. And I would also like us to continue to look at ways in which we need to make adjustments in our lives. We need to continue to tell ourselves and people around us that it's not okay for us to continue to gather in assemblies. Funerals and weddings and birthdays and the like need to be put on hold. And for those who are already in the spirit of giving, for now, I don't really care about the motives behind people's giving. People should just give. Whether you want to give with cameras present or give very quietly, it's entirely up to you. But I'm appealing that people should still give anyway. God Almighty will be the judge of everyone. And leaders, whether they are political leaders or community leaders, business leaders, need to continue to step up. Be responsible, be accountable, be transparent. To whom much is given, much is expected.
Thank you very much. Zouera.
So my thoughts about the lockdown or not? So I agree actually with what Erelu was just saying now. We need to, because we don't have the infrastructure to deal with many sick people, we need to reduce the number of people who get it, right? So we need to use the common sense of, enforcing physical distancing and washing our hands and really making sure that we reopen things gradually. I'm looking at what we're trying to do at work and, how everybody can't come to the office. We're doing more working from home, etc. But then how do we really implement this with people who, like I was saying earlier, have to make a living every day? And I don't know how sustainable it is to keep people locked up for a long time without providing for them. I just don't see how the math works out, that we have, people who need to eat every day and they can't go out, but then even if they got the COVID, we don't even have enough testing materials, we don't have enough isolation centers, we don't have enough treatment centers. And so we need to just reduce people getting it. But at the same time, I think we really need to think about how we, like I said, don't completely destroy the economy and have nothing to survive. Like so fine, we've survived COVID amongst other illnesses that take many more of us out every year, but then there's no business left, there's no economy left, the SMEs have fallen apart, the companies are all, crashed, everybody's lost their job. Like we need to have a plan that ensures that we survive COVID, that we go through it intelligently, but that we have life on the other side.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't know if you've got, if Tunji is still there. I know that we've been going in and out. And we really have run out of time as well. And just as I want to shut down, I'll just read something that popped up from a certain Adetola Adebayi. He's saying, lockdown is about flattening the curve, essentially impact on hospitals. The virus is here to stay, and we better start getting used to the new normal and listen to our people in terms of preventive measures and combination treatment to shorten the life of the virus and treat the symptoms. Wishing for zero infection rate is unrealistic. I think on that note, I really have to thank everybody. Start off by thanking Emmanuel Chapel for putting this webinar together. Thanks for all the people that got in to participate, especially also our panelists, Erelu, Bisi, Mr. Tunji, Lardner, and Zouera, Youssoufou. Thank you all for participating in this. It's been, despite the technical challenges we face, I think it's been quite a bit of a very active discussion. And if you're opportune to see what's been happening on the chat box, there's a lot of conversation going on, even way above that which we had on our screens here. So once again, thank you very much, Emmanuel Chapel. Thank you. God bless you, and we'll see you hopefully next week when we have the next webinar. Thank you, and take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. It's been great.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Oh, God.
Why are you watching this on the big screen? How come?
TV.
Facebook.
Facebook, Digital Quest.
Technology.
Fantastic topic, very interactive, and very, very relevant. Charity last night, Teresa, the one she's been doing, it's not, it's like, it's for